The plasma rifle felt like an extension of Sarah Chen's soul as she crouched behind the twisted metal that had once been a Zarathi battle tank. The crimson sand of Kepler 442b stretched endlessly around her, dotted with the smoking remains of what military command called the final push. She pressed her back against the warm metal and checked her ammunition counter. 12 shots left. "Chen, status report!" Captain Morrison's voice crackled through her helmet comm, barely audible over the distant thunder of orbital bombardments. "Still breathing, sir. Enemy position is 40 meters northeast. 3 hostiles. Heavy weapons." Sarah wiped the sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of clean skin through the grime and alien dust that coated her face. The Zarathi were unlike anything humanity had encountered in their brief journey among the stars. 8 feet tall, with crystalline exoskeletons that could deflect most conventional weapons, they moved with an eerie grace that made them deadly opponents. But Sarah had learned something about them during her 3 years on this godforsaken planet. They were predictable. They followed patterns, just like any other military force. She counted to 10, then rolled left just as the Zarathi plasma cannon fired where she had been hiding. The aliens always waited exactly 12 seconds between shots when they thought they had someone pinned. Always. Sarah sprinted toward a crater 20 meters away, her boots sending up small clouds of red dust. Behind her, the cannon fired again, the superheated air singing past her ear. 11 seconds this time. They were getting excited. She dove into the crater and immediately spotted what she was looking for. The reflective surface of a downed communications satellite, angled perfectly to give her a clear view of the Zarathi position. In the reflection, she could see all 3 aliens clustered around their weapon, their attention focused on her last position. "Amateurs," she muttered, bringing her rifle to her shoulder. The first shot took down the gunner. The second dropped the loader before he could reach for his sidearm. The third Zarathi, the squad leader judging by the additional crystalline growths on his shoulders, was faster than his companions. He managed to raise his weapon, but Sarah was already moving, her next shot catching him center mass. Silence fell over the battlefield except for the distant rumble of human dropships approaching from the horizon. "Area secured," Sarah reported, standing slowly from the crater. 3 hostiles down." "Copy that, Chen. Good work. Extraction is en route." Sarah looked around at the alien landscape that had been her home for 3 years. Tomorrow, the peace treaty would be signed. The war that had consumed her entire adult life would be over. She should feel something, relief, happiness, maybe even sadness. Instead, she felt empty. The dropship touched down 20 minutes later, kicking up a storm of red dust. As Sarah climbed aboard, she caught sight of her reflection in the ship's window. The woman staring back at her was 25 years old, but looked 40. Her eyes held the weight of too many battles, too many friends lost, too many decisions that kept her awake at night. "Hey, Chen, you hear the news?" Corporal Williams slapped her shoulder as the ship lifted off. "They're offering full scholarships to any veteran who wants to attend the Galactic Academy." Sarah frowned. The Galactic Academy was the most prestigious educational institution in known space, located on the neutral world of Harmony Station. It was where the children of ambassadors, corporate executives, and planetary governors went to learn. It was not where battle-scarred human soldiers belonged. "What's the catch?" she asked. Williams grinned. "No catch. Part of the peace treaty. Humans get equal access to galactic education. First time in history." Sarah stared out the window as Kepler 442b fell away beneath them. In the distance, she could see the massive forms of Zarathi dreadnoughts beginning their journey home. The war was truly over. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the docking bay of Harmony Station, a single duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The station was a marvel of engineering, a massive ring-shaped structure that rotated slowly to provide artificial gravity. Ships from dozens of species came and went constantly, and the babble of alien languages filled the air. She had spent the journey from Earth studying, trying to prepare for what lay ahead. The Galactic Academy taught advanced sciences, interspecies diplomacy, quantum mechanics, and a dozen other subjects that seemed impossibly complex after years of focusing on the simple mathematics of warfare. Part of her wondered if she was making a mistake. Sarah Chen? The voice belonged to a tall, blue-skinned humanoid with 4 arms and large, multifaceted eyes. This was clearly a Zentari, one of the species known for their exceptional intelligence and perfect memory. "That's me," Sarah replied. "I am Administrator Kellex 9943. I will be your orientation guide." The Zentari's voice was precise, clinical. "I must inform you that you are the first human to attend the Academy. Your arrival has generated considerable interest." As they walked through the station's corridors, Sarah noticed the stares. Aliens of every description paused their conversations to watch her pass. Some looked curious, others dismissive. A few seemed openly hostile. "The Academy operates under strict protocols," Administrator Kellex 9943 continued. "Academic dishonesty is not tolerated. Violence of any kind results in immediate expulsion. Collaboration with other species is mandatory for all assignments." They boarded a shuttle that would take them from the station to the Academy itself, which occupied a small moon orbiting Harmony Station's planet. During the 15-minute journey, the administrator continued his briefing. "Your dormitory assignment is somewhat unique. Given the physiological differences between humans and other species, you have been assigned private quarters. Your meal plan has been adjusted to accommodate human dietary requirements. I trust this will be satisfactory." Sarah nodded, though she suspected the unique arrangements were more about keeping her separate from the other students than accommodating her needs. The academy was breathtaking. Crystalline spires reached toward the artificial sky of the moon's atmospheric dome. Gardens filled with plants from 100 different worlds created a riot of colors and scents. Students moved between buildings in small groups, their conversations a mixture of spoken language, telepathic communication, and forms of expression Sarah couldn't begin to understand. Her quarters were in a building on the edge of the campus, small but comfortable. The furniture could be adjusted to accommodate different body types, and the walls could display any environment she chose. She selected a view of Earth's Pacific Ocean at sunset. That first night, Sarah lay on her bed and stared at the simulated waves. For 3 years, she had dreamed of silence, of peace, of a world without the constant threat of death. Now she had it, and she missed the clarity of purpose that war had provided. On the battlefield, success was measured in simple terms: survive, complete the mission, protect your squad. Here the rules were different, and she wasn't sure she understood them yet. The next morning brought her first classes: quantum physics with Professor Thane 99, a mechanical being whose body was composed of shifting metallic surfaces; interspecies psychology with Dr. Vexhai, a creature that looked like a cross between an octopus and a butterfly; galactic history with Professor Morningstar, one of the few organic instructors who wasn't entirely alien, though his species, the Valdris, had evolved from plants rather than animals. In each class, Sarah was the only human. In each class, she was the only one who had to ask for basic clarification of concepts that seemed obvious to everyone else. In each class, she felt the weight of hundreds of alien eyes evaluating her, measuring her, finding her wanting. During her 3rd week, the subtle discrimination became more overt. Study groups that had initially included her began meeting without sending her notifications. Lab partners would complete assignments without consulting her, then express surprise that she hadn't contributed. In the cafeteria, conversations would stop when she approached, only to resume in languages she didn't understand once she had passed. The problem, explained Zixtal, a young Zentari who had been assigned as her academic advisor, is that humans are seen as primitive. Your species has only been spacefaring for 200 years. Most of the other student civilizations have been exploring the galaxy for millennia. Sarah looked across the advisor's office at the academic records displayed on the wall. Every species seemed to have some specialization that made them valuable. Zentari had perfect memory and lightning-fast calculation abilities. Zarathi had natural understanding of crystalline technology. The gaseous Nephilim could process information in ways that defied conventional understanding. "What do humans bring to the table?" Sarah asked. Zixtal's large eyes studied her for a moment. "That remains to be seen. Your species' greatest achievement to date has been military victory through persistence. It is unclear how this translates to academic excellence." That evening, Sarah sat in the common area of her dormitory building, attempting to work on an assignment for her galactic history class. The task seemed simple enough. Analyze the cultural factors that led to the collapse of the Rathani Empire. But every source she consulted assumed knowledge she didn't possess, referenced events she had never heard of, and used concepts that had no equivalent in human experience. Struggling with Professor Morningstar's assignment? The voice belonged to another human, the first one Sarah had seen since arriving at the academy. She looked up to see a young man about her own age, with the pale complexion and slightly enlarged eyes that marked him as someone from one of the outer colonies. He extended his hand. "Michael Santos, third-year xenobiology student. You must be the famous Sarah Chen." "Famous?" Sarah shook his hand, grateful for the familiar gesture. "Only human veteran admitted to the academy. Word gets around." Michael sat down across from her. "Mind if I ask what happened to your squad on Kepler 442b? Sarah's jaw tightened. "Which battle?" "The one where you held off an entire Zarathi company for 6 hours while your unit evacuated civilians." "How do you know about that?" Michael smiled sadly. "Because I was one of those civilians. I was doing research on indigenous plant life when the Zarathi attacked the settlement. You saved my life, and about 300 others." Sarah remembered that day. It had been near the end of the war, and the Zarathi had been making desperate pushes to capture strategic positions before the peace talks concluded. A research station with minimal defenses had been an easy target. She and her squad had been ordered to buy time for an evacuation. "We lost 4 good soldiers that day," Sarah said quietly, "and saved 300 lives. That's not nothing." They worked on their assignments in comfortable silence for a while. Eventually, Michael spoke again. "The other students don't know what to make of you. They've heard stories about human military capabilities, but they can't reconcile that with the fact that you struggle with basic galactic history." "Because I'm stupid?" Sarah asked, only half joking. "Because your brain works differently. You see patterns they miss, make connections they can't follow. Yesterday, in advanced biochemistry, Professor Yel Noth was discussing the theoretical applications of enzyme cascades in terraforming. You asked a question about military applications that made the entire class stop and think." Sarah remembered that moment. She had wondered if the same enzyme processes could be weaponized, turned against an enemy's food supply or atmospheric composition. It had seemed like an obvious question to her. "The problem isn't that you're not smart enough," Michael continued. "It's that you think like a soldier in a place designed for academics. But maybe that's exactly what this place needs." That night, Sarah dreamed of Kepler 442b for the first time since arriving at the academy. But instead of the usual nightmares of battle and loss, she dreamed of red sand and quiet moments between the fighting. She remembered watching alien sunsets with her squad mates, discussing what they would do when the war ended. She remembered the satisfaction of solving tactical problems, of finding ways to accomplish impossible missions. When she woke, she realized something important. She missed the challenge of the impossible. The Academy was about to discover that humans had a gift for making the impossible merely difficult. They just didn't know it yet. The Advanced Tactical Analysis class was supposed to be Sarah's easiest subject. When she had signed up for it, she assumed her military experience would finally give her an advantage over her classmates. She was wrong. Miss Chen, perhaps you could explain to the class why your simulation resulted in a 73% casualty rate among civilian populations. Professor Kethmore's voice carried the distinctive harmonic overtones of the vanguard species, making every word sound like a judgment. Sarah looked at the holographic display showing her solution to the morning's exercise. The scenario had involved evacuating a research station under attack by hostile forces. Her plan was efficient, direct, and would have saved the maximum number of lives in the shortest time possible. The plan prioritizes speed and efficiency, Sarah replied, standing to address the class as protocol demanded. Every minute of delay increases the risk to all personnel involved. At the cost of psychological trauma to the evacuees, interrupted Velkara, a tall Zarathi student whose crystalline skin shifted through shades of blue to indicate disapproval. Your plan treats sapient beings like cargo. Other students murmured agreement. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice level. In a combat situation, the priority is preservation of life, not comfort. But this wasn't a combat situation, Professor Kethmore said, his massive form shifting as he moved closer to the display. This was a rescue operation in contested space. Your solution demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the psychological factors involved in crisis management. Sarah bit back her response. She wanted to tell them about the real evacuation on Kepler 442b, about holding defensive positions while scientists and researchers ran for their lives. She wanted to explain that in real emergencies, people didn't care about psychological trauma if it meant they survived to see another day. Instead, she said, "I'll review the recommended protocols for future exercises." "See that you do," Professor Kethmore replied, his attention already shifting to the next student presentation. After class, Sarah gathered her materials slowly, waiting for the lecture hall to empty. She had learned that lingering in groups led to uncomfortable silences and thinly veiled comments about primitive human thinking. Chen. The voice belonged to Dexmore, a four-armed hegemony student who consistently scored at the top of their class. Your tactical solution was actually quite elegant, if somewhat direct. Sarah looked up, surprised. Dexmore rarely spoke to her outside of mandatory group assignments. The casualty projections were flawed, Dexmore continued, his secondary arms gesturing while his primary hands held his data tablet. The simulation didn't account for panic-induced mistakes or the time lost to indecision. Your approach would have saved more lives than the correct solution. Then why didn't you say something in class? Dexmore's expression, as much as Sarah could read alien facial expressions, seemed uncomfortable. Because the Academy doesn't teach military tactics. It teaches diplomatic solutions, negotiated outcomes, civilized responses to crisis. Your expertise is not valued here. Sarah walked back to her dormitory through the Academy's beautiful gardens, Dexmore's words echoing in her mind. She paused beside a fountain surrounded by flowering plants from dozens of different worlds. The scene was peaceful, almost impossibly so. It was exactly the kind of place she had dreamed of during the long nights on Kepler 442b. So why did she feel so out of place? Her reflection was interrupted by raised voices from the direction of the advanced physics building. Sarah moved closer, recognizing the universal sound of an argument regardless of the species involved. Typical primitive thinking. You cannot simply apply more force to solve every problem. And you cannot simply ignore practical limitations because they don't fit your theoretical models. Sarah rounded a corner to see Michael Santos facing off against three upperclassmen, two Zentari and a Nephilim whose gaseous form was cycling through agitated colors. A small crowd had gathered to watch. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah asked, stepping into the circle. One of the Zentari, whose academic insignia marked him as a senior research assistant, turned his large eyes toward her. "Your fellow human refuses to accept that his proposal for the atmospheric processing project is fundamentally flawed." "It's not flawed," Michael said through gritted teeth. "It's just not elegant enough for their tastes." Sarah looked between them. "What's the project?" "Theoretical terraforming of a Mars-class planet," the Nephilim student explained, his form shifting to cooler blues as he calmed slightly. "The goal is to develop a sustainable atmosphere within 50 standard years using available technology. Michael's solution involves brute force atmospheric processors," the senior research assistant continued. "Thousands of them working continuously. It lacks any consideration for environmental harmony or sustainable development principles." "But it works," Michael insisted. "The calculations are solid. It would create a breathable atmosphere in 37 years. "At tremendous resource cost and environmental disruption," the Nephilim countered. Sarah studied the data tablet Michael held out to her. His proposal was indeed brute force. Massive atmospheric processors that would pump greenhouse gases into the planet's atmosphere, while simultaneously breaking down surface minerals to release oxygen and water vapor. It was the kind of solution a human engineer would develop, direct, practical, and effective. "What's the Academy's preferred solution?" Sarah asked. The second Zentari student activated a holographic display showing a much more complex plan. "Gradual introduction of specialized atmospheric bacteria, cultivation of genetically modified plant life, and careful management of solar radiation through orbital mirror systems. The process would take 97 years, but would result in a completely balanced ecosystem." Sarah nodded slowly. "And if there was an emergency? If people needed that planet habitable as soon as possible?" "Emergencies are inefficient," the senior research assistant replied. "Proper planning eliminates the need for desperate measures." "No," Sarah said quietly. "Proper planning accounts for desperate measures." She looked around at the assembled students, most of whom were watching with the kind of polite interest that suggested they were more interested in the spectacle than the actual debate. "You're both right," she continued. "The Academy solution is elegant, sustainable, and would create a beautiful world. Michael's solution is fast, practical, and would save lives if time was critical. But you're approaching this like it's an either-or choice." Sarah activated her own data tablet and began sketching modifications to both plans. "What if you used Michael's atmospheric processors for the first phase, say 15 years, to create a basic atmosphere that could support human life with breathing apparatus? Then transition to the Academy's biological approach for the long-term development. You get emergency habitability in 15 years and a fully developed ecosystem in 60. The assembled students studied her hybrid proposal. Several began running calculations on their tablets. "The resource cost would still be enormous," the Nephilim student pointed out. "Less than Michael's original plan," Sarah replied. "And the environmental impact would be minimized by the biological phase. The timeline is still slower than optimal for emergency deployment," one of the Zentari noted. "But faster than the biological approach alone," Sarah countered. "And it maintains long-term sustainability." For several minutes, the students worked through the mathematics of her proposal. Finally, the senior research assistant looked up from his calculations. "This could work," he admitted grudgingly. "The hybrid approach addresses the primary weaknesses of both original proposals." "It's still a compromise," the Nephilim added, "but it's a viable one." As the crowd began to disperse, the senior research assistant approached Sarah. "I am Kellex 7742. he said formally. I was not expecting such synthesis from a first-year student. I've had practice finding middle ground, Sarah replied. Indeed, perhaps we have underestimated human problem-solving capabilities. That evening, Sarah found herself in an unfamiliar situation. She had been invited to a study group, not as a charity case or because regulations required her inclusion, but because the students actually wanted her perspective. The group met in one of the Academy's smaller conference rooms, around a table that could adjust its height and surface area to accommodate different species. Besides Sarah and Michael, there were 6 other students, 2 Zentari, a hegemony representative, another Zarathi, and surprisingly, a young Valdris, who introduced herself as Bloom of Morning Sunlight. We've been working on the final project for advanced systems theory, explained HFY, one of the Zentari. The task is to design a self-sustaining colony ship capable of supporting multiple species during a 50-year journey. Sarah reviewed the project parameters on her tablet. The challenge was significant. Different species had varying requirements for atmosphere, gravity, nutrition, and social interaction. The ship would need to maintain perfect environmental balance while managing resource recycling, population dynamics, and psychological health for 5 decades. What approaches have you considered? Sarah asked. Separate habitat modules for each species, the Zarathi student Velkara replied. Each module optimized for specific physiological requirements. Centralized life support with variable environmental zones, added the hegemony student Dexmore. Hybrid organic mechanical systems that adapt to passenger needs, suggested Bloom of Morning Sunlight, her voice carrying the melodic tones typical of her plant-based species. Sarah studied the various proposals, noting the strengths and weaknesses of each approach. The separate modules provided optimal conditions for each species, but required enormous redundancy in life support systems. The centralized approach was more efficient, but couldn't accommodate species with incompatible environmental needs. The adaptive systems were elegant, but relied on theoretical technology that didn't exist yet. You're all thinking about this wrong, Sarah said finally. The room fell silent. She had spoken more bluntly than Academy protocol recommended, but her time on the battlefield had taught her the value of direct communication. I mean, she continued more diplomatically, you're approaching this like a design problem when it's actually a survival problem. Explain, HFY requested, his tone curious rather than hostile. Sarah activated the room's holographic display and began sketching a new ship design. 50 years is a long time. Things will break. People will die. Resources will run low. Your ship doesn't just need to work perfectly, it needs to fail gracefully and recover from disasters. She outlined her concept, a modular design with redundant systems, but not the kind of redundancy the other students had suggested. Instead of duplicate life support systems, her ship carried excess manufacturing capacity. Instead of sealed environmental zones, she designed flexible spaces that could be reconfigured as needs changed. The ship starts with optimal conditions for each species, Sarah explained, but it's designed to adapt. If the Valdris hydroponics bay fails, this space can be converted to support their needs while repairs are made. If population demographics change during the journey, modules can be recombined or subdivided. But the engineering complexity, Dexmore began, is manageable if you design for modification from the beginning, Sarah interrupted. Every system has manual overrides. Every space has multiple possible configurations. Every critical function has at least 3 different ways to accomplish it. Michael leaned forward, studying the design. It's like building a ship that can rebuild itself. Exactly. You plan for the fact that your plans will fail. Velkara's crystalline skin shifted to a thoughtful amber color. This approach assumes constant crisis management. Because there will be constant crises, Sarah replied. 50 years is long enough for equipment to fail, for emergencies to arise, for situations you never anticipated. The question is whether your ship can handle them. Over the next 3 hours, the study group worked through Sarah's approach, refining the design and testing it against various failure scenarios. What emerged was unlike any of their original proposals, a living system that could evolve and adapt throughout the journey. The Academy instructors are going to hate this, Bloom of Morning Sunlight observed as they wrapped up for the evening. Why? Sarah asked. Because it's not elegant, it's not optimal, it's just practical. But it would work, Zexhai added. Even under worst-case scenarios, this design would keep people alive. As the group packed up their materials, Velkara approached Sarah. The Zarathi's presence was imposing. Her crystalline exoskeleton caught the room's lights and threw back rainbow patterns. But her tone was respectful. "I owe you an apology," she said. "In Professor Kethmore's class, I criticized your evacuation plan. I thought you were being callous, treating people like objects to be moved efficiently." "You weren't entirely wrong," Sarah replied. "I was treating them like objects. But you were treating them like precious objects. Objects that must be protected at all costs, even if the process is uncomfortable." Velkara's skin shifted to a warm golden color. "I did not understand the distinction until tonight. What changed your mind?" "Your ship design. It prioritizes survival over comfort, function over form. But it does so in service of protecting the people aboard. You think like a guardian." Sarah considered that description. Guardian. It felt more accurate than soldier, more purposeful than veteran. "My people have a saying," Velkara continued. "The crystal that bends does not break. I think humans understand this instinctively." The next morning, Sarah woke to find a message waiting on her communication terminal. It was from Administrator Kelx 9943 requesting her presence in his office immediately. She dressed quickly and made her way across campus, wondering what she might have done wrong. The administrator's office was located in the Academy's central spire, a crystalline tower that offered a panoramic view of the artificial landscape. "Miss Chen," Administrator Kelx 9943 began without preamble, "your presence at the Academy has generated unexpected developments." Sarah remained standing, waiting for clarification. 3 faculty members have filed formal complaints about your participation in their classes. They argue that your military background creates a disruptive influence on academic discourse. Sarah's heart sank. She had known this was coming, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. "However," the administrator continued, 7 other faculty members have requested that you be added to their advanced courses despite lacking the usual prerequisites. They argue that your perspective brings valuable insights to theoretical discussions. I don't understand. Neither do I entirely. Your academic performance is exactly average, neither exceptional nor deficient, yet your presence seems to polarize the faculty and student body. You are either seen as a contaminating influence or a valuable addition. Administrator Kelix 9943 activated a holographic display showing academic records and statistical analyses. "I have been tasked with determining whether your continued enrollment serves the Academy's interests. Tell me, Miss Chen, what do you believe you contribute to this institution?" Sarah thought about the question seriously. What did she contribute? She wasn't the smartest student, didn't have the best grades, and often struggled with concepts her classmates found elementary. "I ask different questions," she said finally. "Explain." "When everyone else is trying to find the optimal solution, I ask what happens when the optimal solution fails. When they're designing perfect systems, I ask how those systems break down. When they're planning for ideal conditions, I plan for everything going wrong. And you believe this is valuable? I think it's necessary. The galaxy is a dangerous place. Beautiful, full of wonders and opportunities, but dangerous. Perfect plans fail. Ideal conditions don't exist. Elegant solutions break down under pressure. Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. The academy teaches students to build amazing things, but no one is teaching them to build things that can survive disaster. Administrator Kellex 9943 studied her for a long moment. The faculty members who wish you removed argue that your focus on failure scenarios promotes pessimistic thinking and stifles creative development. Maybe they're right, but the faculty members who want me in advanced courses probably see what happened in my study group last night. Sometimes pessimistic thinking saves lives. Ah, yes. The colony ship project. Professor Yell Noth spoke to me about your group's proposal. Highly unconventional but remarkably robust under stress testing. The administrator turned to face the window, looking out over the academy grounds where students from dozens of species worked and studied together. Do you know why this academy was founded, Miss Chen? To promote interspecies cooperation and understanding. That was the stated goal. The actual reason was more practical. 300 years ago, the hegemony attempted to expand into Zentari space. The resulting conflict lasted 70 years and devastated both civilizations. When it ended, the survivors realized that different species approached problems in fundamentally different ways. He turned back to face her. The Zentari excelled at memory and calculation. The hegemony understood complex systems. The Valdris had mastered biological sciences. Each species had strengths, but also blind spots. The academy was created to help young minds learn to see beyond their species' natural perspective. But humans don't have a natural perspective yet, Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. We're too new to space travel. Precisely. Your species lacks the specialized advantages of older civilizations. But perhaps that is itself an advantage. Humans seem uniquely capable of adopting and adapting the perspectives of other species. Sarah thought about the colony ship design, how she had taken elements from each student's approach and combined them into something new. She thought about her hybrid terraforming plan, bridging the gap between Michael's practical approach and the Academy's elegant solutions. So what happens now? She asked. Now you continue your studies, but with a modified curriculum. Administrator Kellex 9943 handed her a data tablet. You will continue attending your current courses, but you will also participate in advanced crisis management seminars, emergency response planning, and system failure analysis. Consider it a specialized track in disaster preparedness. Sarah looked at the course list, feeling a spark of excitement she hadn't experienced since arriving at the academy. There is one condition, the administrator added. Your role will be controversial. Some students and faculty will see your focus on failure as defeatist. Others will appreciate the practical perspective you bring. You must be prepared to stand your ground intellectually while remaining respectful of academy protocols. I understand. I hope you do. Because what happens next will determine not just your academic future, but potentially the future of human-alien relations in academic settings. As Sarah left the administrator's office, she realized she was smiling for the first time since arriving at the academy. She had found her purpose here, her way to contribute. She wasn't just learning to be a student again. She was learning to be a guardian of knowledge itself. The emergency alarm that woke Sarah at 0347 local time was unlike anything she had heard at the academy. Instead of the gentle chimes used for routine drills, this was a harsh, insistent wail that spoke of genuine crisis. She was dressed and out the door within 90 seconds, her military training overriding months of civilian routine. The corridors were filled with confused students in various states of dress, many speaking rapidly in their native languages. The universal translators struggled to keep up with the overlapping conversations, creating a babel of half-translated fragments. Main reactor showing anomalous readings. Can't reach the control center. Evacuation protocols should have... Sarah pushed through the crowd toward the central spire. following the sound of authoritative voices. She found Administrator Kellex 9943 in the main lobby, surrounded by faculty members and senior students. His usually composed demeanor showed cracks of stress. "The situation is contained for now," he was saying, "but we need to begin evacuation procedures as a precaution." "What's the situation?" Sarah asked, approaching the group. Professor Kethmore turned his massive form toward her. "The Academy's fusion reactor is experiencing a cascade failure in the magnetic containment system. If it cannot be stabilized, we have approximately 18 hours before catastrophic containment loss." Sarah felt the familiar chill that came with receiving a mission briefing under fire. "What are the current response efforts?" "The automated safety systems have engaged primary containment," replied Dr. HFY, her butterfly-like form fluttering with agitation. "A team of our best physics students and 3 faculty members are working to stabilize the magnetic field generators." "And evacuation plans?" "The Academy houses 47,000 students and faculty," Administrator Kellex 9943 replied. "Our evacuation shuttles can transport approximately 8,000 beings per hour under optimal conditions. Full evacuation would require 6 hours minimum." Sarah did the math quickly. "That's cutting it very close if you only have 18 hours. "Which is why," Professor Morningstar interjected, his plant-based form swaying with obvious distress, "we are focusing on technical solutions rather than evacuation." "Show me the reactor schematics," Sarah said. "Miss Chen, this is hardly an appropriate time for academic curiosity," Professor Kethmore rumbled. "This is exactly the time for practical problem-solving," Sarah replied firmly. "If the technical solution fails, you need backup plans, and if I'm going to help with evacuation logistics, I need to understand what we're dealing with." Administrator Kellex 9943 activated a holographic display showing the reactor complex. The Academy's fusion plant was a marvel of engineering, using magnetic fields to contain plasma at temperatures that would vaporize any physical container. The system was supposed to be fail-safe, with multiple redundant safety systems. The cascade began when a solar flare caused fluctuations in the primary magnetic field generators, Dr. HFY explained. "The automated systems compensated, but the adjustment created harmonic resonances in the secondary containment field. Now both systems are destabilizing each other." Sarah studied the display, noting the locations of backup systems, control interfaces, and structural weak points. Her mind automatically began cataloging potential failure modes and emergency responses. "Who's working on the technical solution?" she asked. "Professor Yelnoth is leading the effort," Administrator Kellex 9943 replied. "With him are our 3 most advanced physics students and 2 specialist technicians. I'd like to help." "Miss Chen," Professor Kethmore began, "reactor engineering requires years of specialized training." "And crisis management requires years of specialized experience," Sarah interrupted. "I'm not going to solve your physics problem, but I might see something your experts miss." 10 minutes later, Sarah was descending into the Academy's lower levels, following maintenance corridors she had never known existed. The reactor complex was buried deep within the moon's crust, protected by layers of rock and reinforced barriers. The control room was a chaos of activity. Professor Yelnoth, whose segmented insectoid form was perfectly adapted for multitasking, manipulated 12 different control interfaces simultaneously. Around him, students and technicians monitored displays, ran calculations, and implemented increasingly desperate stabilization attempts. "The harmonic frequency is shifting faster than we can compensate," reported HFY, one of the Zentari students Sarah recognized from her study group. "Every adjustment we make creates new instabilities." "Then stop making adjustments," Sarah suggested. The room fell silent. Professor Yelnoth's compound eyes focused on her with what looked like irritation. "I beg your pardon?" "You're chasing a moving target," Sarah explained, approaching the main display. Every time you try to fix one problem, you create a new one. The system is fighting you. The alternative is containment failure, Professor Yelnoth replied coldly. Without active compensation, the magnetic fields will collapse within hours. How long can the emergency containment hold without any intervention? Approximately 14 hours. And how long to completely evacuate the academy? 6 hours minimum, 8 hours realistically. Sarah nodded. So you have an 8-hour buffer. What if instead of trying to fix the current system, you focus on building a temporary containment solution? Impossible, one of the technicians interjected. The equipment required would take weeks to fabricate and install. Not from scratch, Sarah replied. But what about cannibalizing other systems? The Academy has redundant power sources, backup life support, emergency equipment. What if you strip those for parts? Professor Yelnoth's form stilled as he considered the suggestion. Theoretically possible, but it would leave the Academy completely vulnerable to any other system failure. You're already facing catastrophic system failure, Sarah pointed out. This is triage. For the next hour, Sarah found herself in familiar territory, coordinating a complex operation under extreme time pressure. While Professor Yelnoth and his team designed a makeshift containment system using salvaged components, she worked with other students to map out evacuation priorities and backup plans. The primary concern is the Nephilim students, Bloom of Morning Sunlight reported. Their gaseous forms require specialized containment during transport. Standard evacuation shuttles cannot accommodate them. How many? Sarah asked. 47 individuals. And how long to modify shuttles for their transport? 3 hours minimum for each shuttle. We have 6 shuttles available. Sarah felt the familiar weight of impossible mathematics. 47 Nephilim, 6 shuttles, 3 hours per modification. Even working simultaneously, they could only save 16 of them before the evacuation deadline. What about the Academy's atmospheric control systems? She asked, suddenly. I don't understand, Bloom of Morning Sunlight replied. The Academy maintains different atmospheric zones for different species, right? There must be systems for containing and transporting various gas mixtures. Yes, but those are fixed installations, which can be disconnected and repurposed. Sarah activated a schematic display of the Academy's life support network. These atmospheric processing units are basically portable environmental chambers. Strip them out, add basic propulsion and life support, and you have emergency evacuation pods. The engineering involved, one of the technicians began, is simpler than building a new reactor containment system, Sarah replied. And we have 47 lives depending on it. Within minutes, Sarah had organized 3 separate emergency response teams. Professor Yelnoth's group continued working on the reactor problem. A second team began cannibalizing atmospheric processing equipment for makeshift evacuation pods. A third group, led by Michael Santos, started modifying the Academy's cargo haulers to serve as emergency transports for species that couldn't fit in standard shuttles. This is highly irregular, Administrator Kellix 9943 observed when Sarah presented the coordinated plan. Academy protocols call for orderly evacuation procedures, not improvised engineering solutions. Academy protocols assume you have time for orderly procedures, Sarah replied. We don't. And if these improvised solutions fail? Sarah looked around the emergency command center that had been set up in the main lobby. Students and faculty from dozens of species worked together, their usual academic hierarchy forgotten in the face of crisis. Zentari used their perfect memory to coordinate supply lists. Hegemony students applied their systems expertise to jury-rigged equipment. Zarathi provided their natural understanding of crystalline technology to solve unexpected compatibility problems. Then we adapt, Sarah said. We find new solutions. We improvise. We make do with what we have. That's what you do when perfect plans fail. Hours passed in a blur of organized chaos. Sarah found herself moving between teams, troubleshooting problems that ranged from technical to logistical to diplomatic. When the Valdris contingent objected to having their hydroponic gardens stripped for emergency supplies, she negotiated a compromise that preserved their most critical specimens. When a group of Zentari students became paralyzed by the implications of modifying safety equipment, she walked them through the decision-making process, step by step. "How do you do this?" Velkara asked during a brief break. The Zarathi student had been working for 6 hours straight on atmospheric processing modifications, her crystalline skin reflecting her exhaustion in muted colors. "Do what?" "Make decisions without perfect information. Act without knowing all the variables." Sarah considered the question. Around them, the improvised command center hummed with activity. Faculty members who normally spent their time in theoretical discussions were elbow-deep in mechanical repairs. Students who had never touched practical equipment were assembling life support systems from spare parts. "You can't know all the variables," Sarah said finally. "There's always something you missed, some factor you didn't account for. So you gather as much information as you can, make the best decision possible with what you have, and stay ready to change course when new information becomes available. But what if you're wrong? Then you were wrong with the best intentions and the best information available. You learn from it and make a better decision next time." Velkara's skin shifted to a thoughtful amber. "My people prefer to avoid action until we have complete certainty." "That's a luxury you can afford when there's no time pressure," Sarah replied. "But sometimes the cost of inaction is higher than the risk of imperfect action." By hour 12, their improvised solutions were coming together. Professor Yelnoth's team had successfully constructed a temporary containment field using components from a dozen different systems. It wouldn't hold indefinitely, but it would buy them several additional days to implement a permanent solution. The atmospheric processing units had been successfully converted into emergency evacuation pods for the Nephilim students. They weren't comfortable, and they wouldn't pass any safety inspections, but they could safely transport gaseous beings to the evacuation ships waiting in orbit. Most importantly, the coordinated effort had reduced evacuation time from 8 hours to 4. Every student and faculty member would be safely off the academy before the emergency containment failed. "Remarkable," Administrator Kellex 9943 commented as he reviewed the final evacuation schedule. "I would not have believed such coordination possible on such short notice." "Crisis has a way of cutting through bureaucracy," Sarah observed. "Indeed, though I suspect the coordination had more to do with your leadership than the crisis itself." As the first evacuation shuttles departed, carrying the most vulnerable students to safety, Sarah found herself back in the reactor control room. Professor Yelnoth was making final adjustments to the temporary containment system, his multiple arms moving with precise efficiency. "Miss Chen," he said without looking up from his controls. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For assuming that military experience was irrelevant to academic problem-solving. What you accomplished today required precisely the kind of thinking the Academy has traditionally discouraged." "I couldn't have done any of it without your expertise," Sarah replied. "I don't understand fusion physics any better today than I did this morning. But you understand crisis management, resource allocation, and adaptive planning. You understand how to coordinate diverse groups under pressure." Professor Yelnoth finally looked up from his controls. "These are not traditionally academic skills, but they may be the most important skills of all." The evacuation proceeded smoothly. Students and faculty who had spent months focused on theoretical perfection worked together to implement practical solutions that saved lives. Species that normally had little contact with each other discovered they could collaborate effectively when necessity demanded it. Sarah stood on the observation deck of the evacuation command ship, watching the Academy's lights grow smaller in the distance. Tomorrow, once the reactor crisis was fully resolved, everyone would return, classes would resume, research would continue, and the Academy would return to its mission of education and discovery. But something fundamental had changed. The crisis had revealed something about the nature of knowledge itself. That theory without practical application was incomplete, just as practice without theoretical understanding was inefficient. "Quite a view," Michael Santos said, joining her at the observation window. "It's beautiful," Sarah agreed. The Academy did look beautiful from this distance, its crystalline spires catching the light of the system's star. "I meant you, actually. What you accomplished down there." Sarah turned to look at him. "We all accomplished it. I just helped coordinate." "No, it was more than that. You showed everyone something they hadn't realized before." "Which is?" "That diversity isn't just about having different species in the same room. It's about having different ways of thinking about problems, different perspectives on what's important." Over the next few days, as the Academy's systems were repaired and upgraded, Sarah found herself at the center of conversations she had never expected to have. Faculty members approached her with questions about crisis preparedness in their research projects. Students sought her input on practical applications of theoretical concepts. More importantly, the Academy's curriculum began to change. New courses appeared in the catalog: crisis management and resource allocation, practical applications of theoretical systems, adaptive problem solving. Sarah was invited to help design these courses, bringing her unique perspective to bear on academic theory. "The Board of Regents has approved a new interdisciplinary program," Administrator Kellex 9943 informed her during a meeting in his office. "Applied crisis management with a focus on adaptive solutions and interspecies coordination." "That sounds interesting," Sarah replied. "I am offering you the position of assistant director." Sarah stared at him in surprise. "I'm a first-year student." "You are a first-year student with practical expertise that no one else in the Academy possesses. Your role would be to bridge the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application." "What would that involve?" "Teaching, research, consultation on emergency planning for academic institutions throughout the galaxy. The position comes with accelerated degree completion and immediate enrollment in our graduate programs." Sarah looked out the window at the Academy grounds, where students from dozens of species walked together between classes. In the months since the reactor crisis, she had noticed changes. Study groups were more diverse. Research projects included more practical applications. Students asked different kinds of questions. "There is one condition," Administrator Kellex 9943 continued. "The program will be controversial. Some faculty members believe the Academy should focus purely on theoretical advancement. They argue that practical concerns distract from pure research." "And what do you think?" "I think the galaxy is a dangerous place, full of wonders and opportunities, but also full of unexpected challenges. I think we have a responsibility to prepare our students not just for ideal conditions, but for the reality they will face." Sarah smiled, recognizing her own words from months earlier. "I accept," she said. That evening, Sarah sat in the Academy's central library, surrounded by the collected knowledge of a dozen civilizations. Students worked quietly at tables around her, their conversations a soft murmur of multiple languages and translation protocols. At a table nearby, Velkara was working with a group that included Zentari, Hegemony, and Nephilim students. They were designing a new approach to interstellar navigation that combined Zentari mathematical precision, Hegemony systems thinking, and Nephilim intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics. At another table, Dexmore was collaborating with Michael and several other students on a terraforming project that balanced efficiency with sustainability, practical needs with ecological harmony. These collaborations would have been unthinkable when Sarah first arrived at the Academy. Different species had worked together when required, but they hadn't truly collaborated, hadn't learned to value perspectives different from their own. "Miss Chen, The voice belonged to Bloom of Morning Sunlight, who approached her table with characteristic Valdris grace. "Just Sarah, please." "Sarah, then. I wanted to thank you for what you taught us during the crisis." "What did I teach you?" "That wisdom comes from many sources. That knowledge without experience is incomplete. But experience without knowledge is inefficient. That the best solutions often come from combining different ways of thinking." Sarah looked around the library again, noting the mix of species, the collaborative work, the questions being asked that no one had thought to ask before. "I think you all taught me the same thing," she said. As Bloom of Morning Sunlight returned to her studies, Sarah opened her own research materials. She was working on a paper about adaptive crisis management. Drawing on her military experience but grounded in the theoretical frameworks she was learning at the academy. The work was challenging in ways that combat had never been. On the battlefield, success and failure were clearly defined. Here, in the realm of ideas and knowledge, the boundaries were less obvious, but the stakes were equally high. The Academy was preparing the next generation of galactic leaders, researchers, and explorers. The decisions they made, the problems they solved, and the failures they learned from would shape the future of interstellar civilization. Sarah had endured the battlefield and earned her place in these halls of learning. But her true fight had never been about proving herself worthy of academia. Her fight was about proving that diversity of thought wasn't just politically correct rhetoric, it was a survival necessity. That the galaxy needed not just brilliant specialists, but people who could bridge the gaps between specializations. That, in a universe full of unknown challenges, the ability to adapt and improvise wasn't just useful, it was essential. She had come to the academy thinking she needed to learn to think like an academic. Instead, she had helped the academy learn to think like survivors. And in a galaxy full of wonders and dangers, that might be the most important lesson of all.